All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the September 2024 Water Conditions Monitoring Committee. My name is Emily Adrid, and I am the Water Planning and Climate Impact Specialist at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Welcome. Today we have just a normal meeting planned with a presentation from the Colorado Climate Center and also from NRCS. I believe we have Peter from the Colorado Climate Center. Peter, do you want to kick us off today?
Yeah, I do. Let me see. Looking for the screen share option here. Share, there we go.
Awesome.
Okay,
Cool.
and then we'll go with this screen. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can. And if today's participants, if you could just write your name and affiliation in the chat, that would be great. Go ahead, Peter.
All right, thank you so much for joining this morning, everyone. For those who may not know me, my name is Peter Goebel. I work with the Colorado Climate Center at Colorado State University and am now the assistant state climatologist here. Today, we're going to go over some of the conditions that we have experienced over the last couple months across the state of Colorado, putting those in a climate context. We're going to talk about drought conditions and try to introduce a couple new products and see if they help with our understanding of what is going on with drought across the state, putting that all in context. And then we're going to wrap up with a look at the seasonal outlook, starting with the next couple of weeks, and then getting into the transition into later fall and winter to see what that might look like. This title image here was a picture that my wife took this weekend. We went up to look at some fall colors, and maybe the coolest thing was we got all the way back down the hill and saw a herd of elk just hanging out a couple miles from home. All right, let's take a look here. All right, we just went over this agenda, so I think we're all squared away. We're going to start with one of these quadrant charts that Russ Schumacher produces, the state climatologist. And this is looking at statewide using gridded data from the National Centers for Environmental Information, temperature and precipitation data that goes back to 1895. And we're looking at statewide average temperature and precipitation for the month of August. And here we see that temperature is on the vertical axis with the kind of horizontal stippled line indicating the 1991 through 2020 normal statewide temperature, and then for August, and then the accumulated precipitation statewide is on the horizontal axis. And again, the stippled line here, the vertical line, is showing us normal precipitation statewide for the month of August. And we can see that we were well above average for temperature and precipitation in August of 2024, 1.3 degrees above the
How are you?
1990.
I'm great.
Oh, we got some background noise there. We were 1.3 degrees above the 1991 through 2020 normal, and then 0.73 inches above the precipitation normal for 1991 through 2020. And in terms of a percent of normal, given that normal is only 2.08 inches, that's a fair bit above normal for precipitation, largely driven by what happened on the west slopes, which we'll talk about soon here. All right, delving into the spatial representation of what we saw temperature-wise over the last full month. So again, this is August, and we see, looking at this entire record going back to 1895, that for most of the state, it was warm with respect to that whole historical period, with a lot of the state showing, the clear majority of the state showing in August, that's at least in the top 35 warmest, and a pretty good chunk kind of east of the Sangre de Cristos and Rocky Mountains, all the way up into the Denver metro area, as well as parts of the San Luis Valley, showing a top 10 warmest August. If we compare it to recent years, it's definitely not out of place within the last several years here. So this is all our Augusts going back to 1895 from that same data set. And we see that it's really right in line with the last 3 Augusts that we had, last 3 or 4, where 2021 through 2024 were all within 0.4 Fahrenheit of each other statewide. Prior to that, we had the kind of off the charts record high August in 2020, which was the start of a disastrous fire season. Here's what we've seen. Here's what we've kind of tacked on in terms of temperature since the start of September. Obviously, as we get into fall, things have cooled down, but this is how warm things have been with respect to normal for the month of September, almost to date. So this is looking through September 22nd. And we can see that temperatures were well above normal, 3 to 5 degrees above normal for the northeastern portion of the state. But we've also had some cooler areas like the San Luis Valley and parts of the west slopes and high country, even up near Aspen and Pitkin County. And these are some of the areas that received quite a bit of precipitation in August and the start of September. So perhaps a little bit more humidity and a little bit less of that kind of late summer sunshine going into directly heating the land surface a little bit more than normal, going into evaporating some of the water from the past month. All right, that's a nice segue into precipitation. So here's a look at August 2024 precipitation totals statewide. It was the 13th wettest August on record. Of course, there were some clear, I guess, winners and losers here. In the metro area, it was really a fairly normal August for moisture. There are some areas further south, like near Pueblo, where it was a drier than normal August. But if we look at most of western Colorado, really all of the area west of the Continental Divide was wetter than normal. In Ouray County near Ridgway, I believe it was Clarion Creek that experienced flooding. There was a state of emergency August 14th. Ridgway, kind of on that west end of Ouray County. I don't know if you can see my cursor, maybe not, but I'm kind of hovering it over approximately where Ridgway is right now. We also see some areas kind of on the north end of the San Luis Valley and into the San Juans a little bit, where we had a record wet August. So it would be interesting to dig into some of the station data and find some stations that maybe confirm that. But definitely some much wetter than normal conditions in August throughout a lot of western Colorado. Here's the full time series statewide going back to 1895, and we can see this final data point on the right hand side is 2024. It was our wettest August statewide since 2008. We had a pretty nice wet August in 2014. It was even wetter than that thanks to what happened on the west slope. So certainly the most moisture that we've seen this time of year statewide, at least as an average in a while. Again, there were winners and losers here, as there so often are in Colorado. And then this is what we've tacked on since. So this is looking at the month of September to date. And we can see that much of northern Colorado has been well drier than normal, but there are areas of southern Colorado that have been wetter than normal. For instance, again, around the eastern half of the San Luis Valley and the Sangre de Cristos, as well as the east side of the Sangres near Walsenburg, and then further to the southeast corner of the state, like near Baca County and parts of Benton Prowers and Los Animas County, also above normal for the month. But there have been some notable dry areas in that same area. For instance, if we look at central Los Animas County and kind of a strip up into Otero and Crowley County and Kiowa County. And that's going to be important when we are putting the US Drought Monitor in context later. Okay, now I'm going to show a couple graphics looking at what's happened for our meteorological summer. So when I say meteorological summer, that's just lumping together the three warmest months of the year on average, and those are June through August, which is also our last three full months. Of course, we've talked a little bit about what's happened since the start of September as well, but this is our last three full month lumped together. And you can see that we're still in that warm and dry quadrant here, 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit above the 1991 through 2020 normal for the summer, which is 66 Fahrenheit. And then we were at 6.23 inches of precipitation, which is 0.58 inches above our 1991 through 2020 normal. Okay, here is the temperature conditions statewide for our meteorological or climatological summer. You can actually see a couple areas where we're showing record warmest, including parts of the San Luis Valley that were both warm and wet, which is somewhat of an unusual combination for summer in Colorado. You typically see that correlation run the other way, where we're more likely than not to see a kind of warmer go with drier and cooler go with wetter. So definitely an interesting summer in that regard. And then we can see some other areas, some splotches showing up that are record wet, including right down in the Four Corners in Montezuma County. And then much of the state showing up in the top 10 warmest June through August. Again, I would say that, when we consider the overall trend, especially in summers, this summer did not really look out of place in terms of the recent historical records. So we only have to go back 2 years to 2002 for a warmer summer. And we can see, looking at our time series here, that 2021 and 2020 were both warmer summers than 2024. Close with 2018, but I believe 2018 also a little bit warmer. We still haven't gotten back up to the 2002 and 2012 level, thank goodness. But if we had another kind of major statewide drought situation where things are really dry going into June, if that happened kind of in the current baseline context, we could see some pretty warm temperatures. But yeah, again, with what we did observe, the 2024 summer was really well in line with what we've been seeing in the last 10 to 15 years. Okay, here's a look at our precipitation for meteorological summer. And yeah, of course, like we've been talking about, there's wet spots, dry spots. And for a lot of us, it probably felt like a dry summer because where most of the people live in Colorado, kind of Front Range and Denver metro area, it was a dry summer. And in fact, if I were to extend this data back through May, much of north central Colorado had a much drier than normal May as well. So those complete 4 months from May through August, much drier than normal in that area, which is a tough deficit to make up since kind of that May-June timeframe is part of the wet season for north central Colorado. But then we see very much the opposite in southwestern Colorado, where it was a top 10 wet summer for a lot of the southwestern portion of the state. And it was the wettest on record for parts of the San Luis Valley and even parts of the eastern San Juans. There are parts of the San Luis Valley where we typically see some of the driest conditions across the state, where precipitation for June through August was much higher there than in the metro area, which is a very unusual combination. Typically, we would certainly see the metro area outpace the San Luis Valley for moisture in summer. Okay, here's that statewide time series looking at precipitation from 1895 all the way through 2024. Really interesting to see that 2024, 2023, and 2022 are not all that different for June through August because the spatial patterns in these years were radically different. Where for a lot of the Denver metro area, as well as especially areas immediately east of the Denver metro area, we saw that June through August were much wetter than normal in 2023 and much drier than normal in 2024. But that's just been almost perfectly counterbalanced by what we've seen out west, where it was very much the opposite for a lot of the west slopes, where June through August of 2023 was much drier than normal, and June through August of 2024 was much wetter than normal. All right, these are our last couple graphics, putting temperature and precipitation conditions in a climate context. But here we're looking at the last 12 full months. Pretty soon here we'll have the full water year data for 2024, looking at October through September. But here we're looking at September through August, 2023 through 2024. And for most of the state, with some exceptions in the high country, it was a top 10 warm water year. And it's honestly, the summer is probably less important for this than what happened over the winter, because the temperature variability from year to year is greater in winter than in summer. So, in that sense, you tend to see winter and spring actually have a bit of an outsized effect on these annual statistics, because you can get these larger deviations from average over the winter time frame. And we did have a warmer than normal winter. There was a period of much cooler than normal in mid-January, but we had a pretty mild December and February, and even in general, some milder conditions in the spring, although we did see some cooler conditions in May. And ultimately, when you add it all up, including our hot summer, we ended up statewide largely with this top 10 warm September through August. Our water year is going to, our kind of end of water year data is going to look a lot like this. All right, and then this is the last 12 months for precipitation. And we see conditions that are well in line with historical averages across the state, as well as more recent normals, since the more recent normals are fairly comparable to the historical averages if we're talking about precipitation. Here we do see some trouble areas again in kind of northern Larimer and Weld County, where you have even some areas that are as bad as top 20 dry. And then we also have top 10 to top 20 dry in kind of parts of Kiowa County into Prowers County, and an area of top 20 to top 35 dry across much of southeastern Colorado. But then we do see quite a bit of area that was wetter than normal, including some wetter record wettest on the southern end and the northern end of the San Luis Valley. So a little bit of mix there, but if you look at the entire map, there's quite a bit of area that's within that range that we'd consider kind of historically average and pretty average by more recent standards as well. This is one last quadrant chart that I wanted to show. This is June 1st through August 1st, temperature and precipitation conditions for Grand Junction specifically. So the Grand Junction weather station at Walker Field, I believe, is where this comes from. And we see it was a record warm summer, but then it was also much wetter than normal. And I talked about this earlier with the San Luis Valley, where that's really interesting because it kind of runs counter to this whole correlation that we see throughout our historical period, where we see warmer tends to go with drier, cooler tends to go with wetter, but 2024, a quite outstanding outlier in this kind of temperature precipitation space for Grand Junction. All right, with that, I'm going to move into our drought update. We've talked a little bit about this with the temperature and precipitation data, but we've had some drought development on the Eastern Plains and amelioration in Western Colorado. you're going to start to see these U.S. drought monitor maps evolve a little bit more slowly because our growing season is kind of winding down now. And we're almost into the season where you start to play more of the wait and see game, where we're waiting and seeing what our coming year's snowpack is going to start to look like. And here's the current US drought monitor depiction. If you've been following along with the temperature and precipitation graphics, probably not a ton of big surprises here. So we do see this area of D2 or severe drought on the eastern plains and southeast Colorado in the Arkansas River Basin, where we have seen some much drier than normal conditions, as well as in the metro area up into Boulder and even Larimer County, where, like I mentioned, we have seen much drier than normal conditions throughout some of our climatological wet season. And so we definitely see a fair bit of moderate drought and just abnormally dry east of the Continental Divide as well. But we've seen some serious amelioration out west, and that is reflected in our 12-week changes in US drought monitor classification, where we can see in general we've gone towards less drought in western Colorado and more drought in eastern Colorado. And then if we look at how things compare to a year ago at this time frame, really all the drought east of the Continental Divide is new as of at least a year ago, since this time last year we were just ending a wet late spring and summer east of the Continental Divide. And then all the drought that was there on the US drought monitor map in southwest Colorado is gone, thanks to the reversal in conditions we've seen, as well as, for the most part, at least an okay to near normal snowpack year. There are some areas of southwestern Colorado where we had some concerns with lower stream flows going into peak stream flow season. And you'll hear more about that, I believe, from NRCS. But with some of the better than normal precipitation conditions that we saw in July and August, we actually saw some stream flows rebound, which is kind of unusual this time of year, where typically if you have wetter than normal conditions in August, you're going to see that that's going to do a lot for the vegetation. It's going to do a lot for the soil moisture. It'll kind of ameliorate potential wildfire conditions, but it usually doesn't contribute all that much to the water supply. For the water supply, we're really looking at what happens throughout the winter and spring season. But the wetter than normal summer did have at least a marginal effect on the water supply as well. Okay, here's a look at some land surface products that can kind of help us suss out the drought situation across Colorado. This is soil moisture percentiles for the top meter of soil as of the middle of the month, and these data come from the Western Land Data Assimilation Systems model, which is a NASA model. And we can see the greens and blues, that's where we have above normal soil moisture, and the warm colors that match the US drought monitor classification scheme. That's where we have below normal soil moisture. You can see the influence of the wetter than normal conditions in the San Luis Valley, as well as some wetter than normal conditions throughout much of southwest Colorado. Eastern Colorado, more than not dry soils, but we do have a bit of a mix with some areas of wetter than normal soils in Lincoln County, as well as up in Yuma and Phillips and Sedgwick counties. Local conditions may vary. So if you're, a farmer seeing this map and it doesn't match your field, soil moisture is just so radically variable with space that local conditions may vary. This is a look at vegetative health using satellite retrievals, so the Vegetation Drought Response Index, or VEGDRI. And this is based off of how effectively the plants are absorbing near infrared radiation, where when plants are absorbing radiation in that wavelength, it's a marker of healthy crop and plant life, healthy ecologies. And we can see that we've got some areas that are showing near normal or unusually or very moist in Western Colorado, particularly in the San Luis Valley, and particularly in the high country too, where in general you're seeing a little bit better retrievals at higher elevations. And then if we look east of the Continental Divide, you see mostly drier than normal with a lot of pre and moderate drought that matches pretty well with that US Drought Monitor depiction. But some areas that received above normal moisture this summer up in the northeast corner of the state are still showing a little bit more moisture than normal. This is a similar depiction, again, using satellite retrievals, but this is blended with some more short-term meteorological indicators. And we can see statewide a little bit more of the drier than normal if we blend it with the short-term meteorological indicators, just because September's been a little bit warmer or drier out west. This is a new product. This is showing terrestrial water storage, which is, again, from the Western Land Data Assimilation Systems model from NASA. And it's actually a blend of soil moisture with satellite retrieval-based groundwater estimates, as well as canopy moisture and snowpack, which are both negligible this time of year. So this time of year, you can really think about that as soil moisture plus groundwater. And again, with both soil moisture and groundwater, local conditions may vary, but we see some concerning low percentiles, particularly across southeastern Colorado. There's a couple things that I want to point out, a couple notes of caution with using this newer product. Number one, it just doesn't work well over cities. So you see this awkward splotch over the metro area. Yeah, I wouldn't trust that. It's got some interesting warts over cities. And then it's kind of assimilating these products of different data resolutions. So it's technically 1 kilometer resolution data, but it assimilates 12 kilometer and 36 kilometer resolution products. So you can see kind of these awkward cutoffs, especially where that 36 kilometer grid point switches over, especially if we look at areas like Western versus Eastern Los Animas County, or some of these areas in the San Luis Valley. And so because of that, the representation can look a little choppy in areas, but I'm excited about the idea of potentially incorporating groundwater in some of these updates. So we've seen above normal temperatures, but that's not necessarily reflective of evaporative demand. Evaporative demand also depends on, or the effect of thirst of the atmosphere for water vapor depends on wind speeds, cloud cover, and surface humidity. And we can see some D1 to D2 level evaporative demand over the last 3 months across much of eastern Colorado. Again, that lines up pretty well with what we're seeing across the US Drought Monitor depiction. And then finally, this is a Coagmet product that we produce in-house. This is water balance from our Coagmet stations throughout the growing season. So this is April 1st through September 20th, precipitation over potential evapotranspiration, or what we call an aridity index. So the areas that have had higher precipitation and or lower potential evapotranspiration or evaporative demand are showing higher percentiles here, and the areas that have been drier or lower precipitation and or higher potential evapotranspiration are being shown in these warmer colors that match the US Drought Monitor percentile classification scheme. And we see these trouble areas like Weld County and southeastern Colorado stand out, as with many of our other products. And then one final kind of newer product, this is seasonal evaporation. So not potential ET, but actual ET. And here, this is largely a function of how much precipitation the region has received over that growing season. This isn't up to date. It's just kind of an example of where this product is going. This is very much in test, but it's not up to date. But it's an interesting product that I hope to use more in the future because it aligns pretty well with grass rangeland production. So it's an important drought metric. All right, so that's all I've got for these new drought products and where we're at with the US Drought Monitor. Now I've got just a few slides on the outlook, and then I'll turn it over to NRCS. We're going to start with the next 7 days. Next 7 days look dry and for the most part above normal temperatures, particularly in the afternoons, looking warm. So this is showing departure from normal precipitation, but if I was showing just a map of forecasted 7-day precipitation across the region, it's basically just going to show no precipitation. There's some chance for a few small, higher base kind of thunderstorms across some of the high country, but for the most part, I would expect the next 7 days to look dry. If we go out to the 8 to 14 day time frame, our meteorological forecast models start to lose some confidence, but we can still look at things probabilistically. So this is the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, which is showing an increased chance of above normal temperature throughout much of the country, including Colorado, and a slight tilt towards lower than normal precipitation. I have seen in some of the models in that first week of October showing a cold front particularly impacting the eastern side of the continental divide, but we're not talking about a very strong cold front. So we're not talking about snow at lower elevations. And we're also not talking about a cold front that's going to bring a lot of moisture. So overall, I'd say this increased probability of below normal precipitation based on some of the meteorological models that I'm looking at makes a lot of sense. Beyond that 8 to 14 day time frame, you have to kind of throw out the meteorological models because they descend into chaos and focus on correlations between the behavior of the atmosphere and more slower moving parts of the climate system, like sea surface temperature patterns, as well as some land surface kind of moisture, soil moisture type patterns, and in winter, even some snowpack patterns. But the biggest focus here is what's going on with the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or El Nino versus La Nina. This is a graphic showing global sea surface temperature anomalies, where we can see some cooler than normal sea surface temperatures developing off the coast of South America, as well as across parts of the central equatorial Pacific. The development of La Nina has been somewhat disrupted, but most models do still show it developing this winter, and that really informs the seasonal forecast. So this is a graphic showing our correlations between the El Nino Southern Oscillation and precipitation here in Colorado using years from 1951 through 2020. And the upper right is showing December, January, February. Upper left. Upper right is March, April, May. Lower right is June, July, August. Lower left is June, July, August, and lower right is September, October, November. So it's the lower right, September, October, November, and upper left that we're going to focus on here, where if La Nina develops, what does that mean for us? And typically, La Nina developing tends to be associated with later onset of cooler air and a little bit drier September, October, November. But once it gets going, it tends to be associated with a wetter than normal December, January, February for the Northern Rockies. So if you're somebody who likes to ski in the high country, particularly in Summit County or in Steamboat, maybe even Winter Park, you might root for La Nina development. Right now, the official NOAA models are showing an 80% chance of La Nina developing by November, December, January. So it's likely that we will have these La Nina conditions in play throughout the winter season. And that really informs some of these Climate Prediction Center outlooks that we're going to see coming up. So this one is showing October, November, December. So our next 3 full months. And we do see that we're likely to hang on to above normal temperatures. That kind of makes sense given what we've been seeing, as well as overall trends in fall and what we typically experience during La Nina, putting that all together. And then if we look at the right-hand side of the picture here, in a slight shading towards below normal precipitation for October through December, but perhaps equal chances or equally clueless for the northern portion of the state. And then I'll go to our winter season. And you can see for winter, the Climate Prediction Center is really going with a classic temperature and precipitation pattern for a La Nina. And for us, that means kind of equal chances for temperature, maybe a slight shading towards above normal for the southwest portion of the state. It does show this increased probability of below normal precipitation. However, I don't feel like the Climate Prediction Center does a particularly good job with this over the high country, where particularly for the northern Rockies, they don't really tend to favor the above normal precipitation when La Nina develops. And we see in our correlation analysis that indeed La Nina does tend to favor these kind of above normal precipitation conditions for the northern Rockies. Not going to say anything about that graphic. We'll go into my takeaways here. So summer 2024 was warmer than normal and wetter than normal. Summer temperatures do continue to trend upwards, and temperatures over the last 5 years have been well in line with one another. So we saw 2021 through 2024 statewide summer temperatures have been very similar. Moisture in recent months has been mixed across the state. Unlike 2023, conditions have been much drier than normal on the Northern Front Range, eastern Colorado, but western Colorado has been much wetter than normal, even with some areas record wet. And we saw a disaster declaration in Ouray County. Land surface models suggest warm, dry conditions are having a cumulative impact on groundwater, which is trending downward across the southeastern region of the state. Some caveats here as we're understanding some of these new data sets that we're using. Seasonal forecast models suggest temperatures, kind of equal chances of above and below normal for northern Colorado with a bit of a tilt towards warm, dry in southern Colorado. Like I said, our in-house analysis would kind of indicate that perhaps things are a little bit more optimistic for the northern Rockies than what that Climate Prediction Center outlook shows. And then the seasonal outlooks that we showed depend heavily on La Nina developing, and that is not a guarantee. So we'll see what happens. Things snow and cold. Hopefully it'll be here before we know it. One thing I kind of forgot to say is that looking kind of at the extended forecast, not seeing a lot of evidence that we're going to have a first snowstorm on the horizon in the next couple weeks, but we'll see what happens as we get later into October. So I'll go ahead and wrap up there. Thanks. Let's keep in touch. I may have been just slightly over on time there, not sure, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those now.
Thanks, Peter. If anybody has questions, feel free to mute yourself or put your question in the chat. I have a quick question, Peter. In the new water storage map that you showed us, can you remind us what variables were used? It was groundwater and what else?
Yeah, so there are 4 variables that go into that. It's soil moisture, groundwater, canopy moisture, and snowpack. So for most of the state, canopy moisture is negligible since that's more of like a forested area variable. And then snowpack is not relevant this time of year. So it's really soil moisture plus groundwater. And if we dig into those data for eastern Colorado, there's just kind of this long, steady decline shown in the model in groundwater. So in a somewhat similar manner to like if we look at reservoir stats for Lake Powell and Lake Mead, that groundwater deficit in the model, I wouldn't expect that all to be made up in 1 year. And then again, this is model data, so it's not a comment on anyone's individual well, and so local conditions may vary.
Okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
helpful. All right, well, if anybody has questions for Peter, just put them in the chat, and we will move on to NRCS. We have Nagam Gill, and I believe I made you a co-host, so I think whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen.
Okay, awesome. Can you hear me, Emily?
Yes.
Awesome.
And also for those of you who joined a little bit later, if you could put your name and affiliation in the chat, that would be great.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am Nagam Gill, and are those subtitles distracting? I can turn that off.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, I'll leave them on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm Nagam Gill, and I work with the NRCS Colorado Snow Survey. And normally Brian DeMoncos gives these presentations. He's the snow survey supervisor, but I am stepping in this week. So yeah, thanks for having me. So first I just wanted to touch on the storm from just this last weekend, which a decent portion of that fell as snow, and primarily the north and central mountains benefited from the storm. So we saw I noted early season sweep, but it quickly melted out. So late season precip that fell as snow ranged from 0.01 inches to 0.04 inches of snow water equivalent. And also we saw like 1 to 2, 3 inches of snow depth. The higher values of snow water equivalent at 0.4 of an inch were at University Camp at 10,300 feet of elevation, Rough and Tumble, Slumgillian, Buckskin Joe. So those are all primarily in like central and northern part of the state. Some are in the south, like east portion, like some Slumgillian. And then 0.3 inches at Echo Lake and Niwot, those are in the Front Range. 0.2 inches of SWE at Hourglass, Porphyry, and Willow Park. So yeah, always exciting to see snow. But again, yeah, with temperatures as high as they are, that quickly melted out just hours later. This is just a graph of that same storm, highlighting precip for the 3 days. So it came in at 415% of median. We can see like majority of the state, well, the whole state benefited with the South Platte doing really well, Arkansas and the upper Rio Grande. Okay, so getting into water year-to-date precipitation, this is water year-to-date through September 22nd, and precipitation is at 102% of median. The median precipitation in inches is about 30.75 inches, so half of the stations are reporting totals above this value, and then the other half are below. The range of totals varies significantly, as we can see across the state. On the low end, some of the SNOTEL sites recorded as little as 18 inches, while the wettest stations are reporting up to 58 inches. The majority of stations fall between 26 inches and 36. If we look into the percentiles, 25% of the stations recorded 26.3 inches or less, while 75% of the stations recorded 36.1 inches or less. And then additionally, the top 10% of stations are seeing values over 42 inches. The highest totals are concentrated in the central and south to southeast basins, while the southwest region is just a bit drier, as expected. And then in comparison to historical data, this year is slightly above the long-term median of 31.65 inches for the 1991 to 2020 period. But while precipitation is a bit higher than normal, the 2024 water year is tracking near the median and still not setting any statewide records at the moment. Overall, most stations are seeing conditions close to historical median, though there are some outliers on both the wet and dry ends of the spectrum. The higher totals, particularly in the top 10% of stations, are above 42 inches. So that'll definitely contribute to increased runoff and reservoir storage as we approach the end of the water year. This is water year to date through the start of the month, so September 1st, and precipitation was at 103% of the 30-year median. So again, reflecting near normal conditions across the state. For the range, we had values from 18.3 to, in more like the drier regions, to 57.5 inches at the wetter sites. The South Platte Basin saw some of the drier conditions, while central, southern, and western basins reported higher totals. And then looking at the percentiles, the 25th percentile, so 25% of stations recorded 24 inches or less, 50%, so the median was at 28.95 inches, so half the stations above, and then the other half are below that. And then the 75th, the top 25 stations are reported totals of 33.85 or more. So then comparing between September 1st and September 22nd, late season storms brought additional precipitation, pushing totals higher across many of these regions. The water year to date median rose from 28.95 inches at the end of August to 30.75 by September 22nd. So definitely reflects the impact of those late season storms. The range of totals also shifted slightly, with some stations moving up in percentile rank. So the top 10% of stations now report totals exceeding 42 inches, and the wettest stations, which had reported 57 inches at the end of August, continue to rise by late September. Okay, so this is month-to-date precipitation for September through September 22nd, and precipitation was at 100% of median. So is we can see the northern regions were lagging behind, with the Yampa, White, Little Snake at 55% of median, Laramie and North Platte at 67. South Platte did fairly well, just slightly below normal at 98%. And then the southern basins were all above normal, ranging from 148% in the Upper Rio Grande, down to 105 in the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, and San Juan. Okay, so for this is 3-month precipitation totals. So from June 25th through September 22nd, and precipitation is at 115% in median. So the 90-day precipitation averaged 6.1 inches. And totals across the state ranged, ranged from 2.9 inches, I didn't note that here, but 2.9 inches to 11.7 inches at the wetter stations. So aligning pretty close with historical variability, where the period of record minimum was 2.8 inches and the max was 11.7. So at the percentile stations, at the 25th percentile, stations recorded 5 inches or less. In the 50th, median totals are 66.1 inches. And in the 75th, 7.2, which is consistent with the historical period of record median, which is 7.4 inches. So overall, for this 90-day period, totals align with historical data, showing no significant deviation from typical conditions. The statewide values are very much within the expected range based on the 30-year normals. So while most areas are near average, regions like the Gunnison, as we can see, is at 148%. And then the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan Basin at 133. So they're seeing well above average precipitation for this period. Okay, so this is 30-day precipitation from August 24th through September 22nd. So statewide average precipitation is at 2.26 inches and a 99% of median on September 22nd. The long-term period of record average is slightly lower at 2.17 inches. So just indicating that conditions are still very close to historical normals for this time of year. As far as ranges, totals vary. It's a mixed bag throughout the state. So lowest totals are 1.2 inches up to 4.1 for this 30-day period. So yeah, a lot of variability there. Getting into the percentiles, for the 25th percentile, we're seeing 1.8 inches. For the median, 2.1, and then for the 75th, 2.6. So these align closely with the historical data, where the period of record median was 2 inches and the long-term 30-year average was 2.26. So again, conditions over the last 30 days are consistent with long-term averages, with no extreme deviations observed. The Arkansas at 137% is well above average, as well as the Upper Rio Grande at 134, and the Gunnison, and also the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, just slightly above average there. So for this is precipitation accumulation for the current water year for the state. And as of September 23rd, we were at 102% of median. For percentile placement, Colorado is in the 49th percentile, meaning the current year's accumulation is pretty close to normal compared to historical data. The current year 2024 is performing significantly better than drought years. Drought years like 2002 and 2012. It's tracking near, again, yeah, near the 49th percentile. So that's in line with moderate precipitation years like 2003, 2009, 2010, and 2013. I didn't note all of those years on here just because it cramped and just made the graph a little noisy. And then and with the historical shading here, we can see that Colorado's fluctuated between extremely dry years in the 10th percentile, like 2002, and then wet years in the 90th percentile, such as 2011 and 2014. So the current year falls in the middle range. So that, shows some stability compared to those extreme years of drought or those extreme wet years. So with only 6 days left in the water year, there is likely minimal change in this overall accumulation. The black line on here is representing our current year, which is within the green and yellow shading. So it just highlights that it's been consistent with normal fluctuations. Also worth noting, years like 2023, slightly wetter in the early season, but leveled off towards the end of the year. So unlike our current water year, we've maintained steady gains kind of throughout the season. So overall, 2024 precipitation accumulation, Colorado has experienced slightly above average for the year, both in terms of the current status and for the entire water year. This is precipitation accumulation for the Gunnison for the water year. And as of September 23rd, the Gunnison was at 112% of median, reflecting an above average water year. The 110% is the median, and compared to the historical average. And then for the percentile ranking, it currently ranks in the 67th percentile. So meaning accumulated precipitation is greater than 2/3 of the years in the historical record. This percentile placement shows that while this year is seen above median precipitation, it's not an extreme outlier in terms of wet years. And again, the black line represents the current year. It shows that it's remained within the green shaded area, so indicating that conditions have stayed above the long-term median, but have not reached record-breaking levels quite. I mean, it is at the upper end of that green shading. Looking at the range of precipitation accumulation in the past for the Gunnison Basin, it's experienced obviously much drier years and significantly wetter years, but in comparison, 2024 is closer to the upper range, so still not within the extreme wettest years. And again, with just 6 days remaining, there's lower, unlikely significant change in total precipitation accumulation. So this means that 2024 will close out with a slightly above average year in terms of precipitation. So yeah, the Gunnison Basin has seen a moderately strong water year with totals well above median, but within the expected range based on historical variations. So precipitation for the upper Rio Grande as of September 23rd, this basin is at 107% of the median, so slightly above average conditions for the water year. It ranked in the 56th percentile, so near the historical average, but modestly higher. The black line shows just a steady rise here within the statistical shading. So again, just shows that this basin's been consistent without major deviations from typical patterns. Compared to drought years, drought years are 2002 again and 2012. Our current water year has been performing much better, but it also, again, doesn't reach the heights of the wetter years. So it's tracking near the middle of the pack historically, and likely this basin will close out as an average to slightly above average year for precipitation in this basin. All right, so so for the South Platte, as of September 23rd, precipitation was at 95% of median, so slightly below average for this time of year. This represents 94% of the water year median, indicating that this basin is seeing near average precipitation. As far as percentile placement, the South Platte is in the 19th percentile, so meaning that this year is drier than average, with 81% of past years reporting higher totals by this point. As far as trends go, our current water year started close to the median levels, but has definitely been trailing just under the historical median throughout the season. And we can see that just reflected in that black line there and staying in the lower percentile. The trend shows consistent, though slightly below average precipitation accumulation, without too many major significant spikes or anomalies. This year is within the normal range of variability, but it's trending toward the lower side when compared to wetter years like 2023, which saw substantial gains earlier in the water year. And again, just 6 days remaining. The South Platte will likely close out with slightly below average precipitation. The long-term outlook is still stable, and while this year hasn't been particularly wet, it remains within expected historical variability. Okay, so this graph shows monthly precipitation accumulations across the state of Colorado over the past 6 water years. So this just allows us to compare how each year's precipitation breaks down by month. Yeah, each color bar represents a specific month, so just gives a better visual, clear visual of the interannual and the variability in precipitation nuances. So in 2024, we see a total of 36 inches for the water year, so that's a bit higher than the median, which is 34. So this year tracks close to the median. It's slightly wetter than 2021, which saw a total of 32 inches, and significantly wetter than 2020, which only reached 26 inches. Precipitation in our water year is notably higher during the spring and early summer months compared to some of the drier years, such as 2020. So for example, in May 2024, precip reached 3.6 inches, whereas in May 2020, it was substantially drier. Looking at that 30-year median, 2024 is tracking closer to normal, while 2020 fell slightly or significantly, below the long-term median. The total for 2023 shows a much wetter year with 40 inches of total precipitation, so driven largely by during the summer months, which is represented by the taller purple and green bars in July, and gray bars, in August. In contrast, 2019 was a standout wetter year, with totals reaching near 42, around just under 40 inches. And so that was driven by consistent above average precipitation across multiple months. one of the standout features in this graph is the variability from month to month. So even within a single water year. So for example, 2024 had strong months like May and June, accumulating 3.6 inches and 2.1 inches respectively, but saw lower accumulations in months like July with just 1.5 inches. So that just reflects the natural fluctuations and patterns across the many basins. So in summary, our water year 2024 is on track to be slightly wetter than average year, with notable contributions during the spring and early summer months. But while it doesn't stand out as much as 2023 or 2019, it has still delivered consistent precipitation across the state. As of the end of August 2024, reservoir storage across the state is mostly in good shape and ended the month at 93% of median, with many basins reporting near or above their historical averages for this time of year. The Upper Rio Grande is at 114% of median, so indicating just a good indicator for water availability there. Arkansas is at 112, so again above normal, as well as the South Platte at 106. The combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan Basin, however, is lagging slightly behind at 82% of median. Comparing these values to July, most basins have maintained or slightly improved their storage levels, with the Upper Rio Grande and Arkansas continuing to hold strong. And then comparing to August this time last year, storage in basins like the South Platte and Yampa White Little Snake has remained stable or improved, while basins like the Gunnison have seen some reduction in storage, which is now at 90% of median. But overall, storage in Colorado is largely in decent shape, with most basins reporting near to above normal levels. As of September 22nd, yes, soil moisture levels across Colorado show a lot of variability, with regions experiencing much wetter than average conditions, and then others in the drier than normal. The Gunnison Basin soil moisture, this is for 8-inch, is at 159% of median, so reflecting very wet conditions there. In the Upper Rio Grande, at 125% of median, well above normal levels. Arkansas at 177, experiencing higher than normal levels there as well. And then drier conditions are reflected in basins like the South Platte at 46% and the Colorado headwaters at 73. The Yampa White Little Snake Basin is at 76% of median, and then the combined Southwest basins are at 103% of median. So overall levels vary across the state, with some basins showing higher than normal levels and others like the South Platte and Colorado headwaters showing drier than average conditions. And then similarly for the 20-inch soil moisture on September 22nd, levels varied across Colorado, with wetter than average conditions in some basins, and then again closer to normal or below average in others. The Arkansas Basin is higher at 151% of median. So the South Platte did pretty well for the 20-inch at 130% of median, and the Upper Rio Grande also above median at 118. The Gunnison also did pretty well here at 116, so slightly wetter than normal. And the combined Southwest basins just slightly below normal at 99% of median. And then in the drier regions, we have the Yampa White Little Snake Basin below median at 82%, and The headwater is a Colorado Headwater Basin at 63% of median. So yeah, just drier conditions in those regions. Overall soil moisture at the 20-inch depth, there's just a mixed bag, from really wet basins in the Arkansas to drier basins like the Yampa White Little Snake. This is the 3-month adjusted volume stream flow observed map from May through July, which was 106% of median. So this reflects slightly above average conditions statewide during this period. The Southwest basins, the combined Southwest basins of San Miguel area and Dolores and San Juan were below median at 68%. So yeah, definitely drier conditions compared to most other basins. Upper Rio Grande also, that this was just like slightly improved than the combined Southwest basins, but at 85% for the Upper Rio Grande, so relatively low stream flow. The South Platte was higher at 119 of median, so that suggests healthier stream flow there. The Arkansas also above median at 118%. This is the map for observed stream flow from June through July. And this increased to 119% of median. So this map highlights the continued improvements in stream flow over this 2-month period. The combined Southwest basins are still below for this June-July observed map at 70% of median. The Upper Rio Grande showed some moderate improvements, reaching 92% of median. The Arkansas, or sorry, that was at 86%, but and the Arkansas above average at 137%, reflecting above normal conditions there, and the Gunnison at 123. Yeah. This is the map for the 50% exceedance probability forecast from May through July, and it was conditions were predicted at 102% statewide. So observed again was 106. So for this forecast, it was slightly above, or the observed conditions were slightly above the predicted of 102. Some key basin comparisons: the Arkansas was predicted at 112, and the observed came in higher at 118. And the South Platte at 100, estimated at 117, and observed data also came in higher. The combined Southwest basins showed the largest deviation, so forecasts were at 59%, but observed were at 68, I believe. 79, sorry, 79%. The Upper Rio Grande expected 73%. So this was pretty close to the observed. Observed still did better at 86%. So in summary, most regions, especially the Arkansas and South Platte basins, saw slightly higher observed stream flow compared to the forecast. However, the Southwest basins reflected drier conditions in that area. And this is the 50% exceedance probability forecast for the June through September period. So for June, there's a lot of variability here, and ranges forecasts range from 76% to 126 based on that 30-year data. The Arkansas is forecasted 126. So just indicating strong likelihood of above average stream flow for the summer months. And the South Platte at 109, reflecting just slightly above average conditions. The Laramie and North Platte basins are near normal at 97%, and then the Upper Rio Grande at 76%, so slightly signaling lower than average water forecasts there. Arkansas definitely stands out as the region with the highest forecasted stream flow, while the Upper Rio Grande is forecasted to be the much drier and drier than the median. All right. So to conclude, the 2024 water year is ending with a near average to above average precipitation across much of Colorado. The Upper Rio Grande, Arkansas, and San Miguel, Dolores, and San Juan basins have seen especially strong performance, contributing to improved conditions. Statewide precip is at 102% of median, ranging from 96% of median in the South Platte, 216 in the Gunnison and the Arkansas. Reservoir storage is at 93%, so down 4% from July. Mean soil moisture across all stations is at 19.7 for the 8-inch soil moisture, and at 17.2% for the 20-inch sensors. Statewide stream flow was 106 of the median for observed from May to July. Apologize. Statewide stream flow was 106% of median from May to July, and improved to 119 of median for June to July. Key basins like the Arkansas and South Platte perform well with the stream flow percentages above 115%, while the combined Southwest basins remain lower at around 70%. And that's all from me. I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, it looks like we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to open it up now to you all. And if any water providers on the call, or municipalities or water managers want to come off mute to provide local updates, that would be great. Or you can put them in the chat. Yes, Shale.
Hey, this is Shale with the Colorado Resiliency Office, so not a water provider or a local municipality, but I do have a quick update. For folks who are familiar on this call, DOLA once a month hosts the local government resources call. It was formerly called the COVID, it was like the COVID recovery call, and then it morphed into the local government coordination call, and now it's called the local government resources call. So it's had a couple of rebrands over time. However, what I wanted to bring up on this call today was that we have our topic in November is going to be centered around wildlife conservation, water, and wildfire funding. So as far as like the water and wildfire side, we have covered a lot of that funding, especially for like IIJA and IRA type funding opportunities, as well as state funding. So we might not go as heavily into those. However, I did just want to give a call to everyone on this call today that if there's anyone who would like to speak on that call that has maybe some funding opportunities for local governments that they might want to be aware of, or anything that we have not covered yet, I'll drop in the chat the links to all of our old presentations. We've been doing this since 2020, so we've covered quite a few. But if there's anyone who would like to be a speaker or knows who we should maybe reach out to as potential speakers for that call, we would much appreciate it. Any leads are kind of helpful. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Shell. I can put information for the local government resources call in the next email that I send out to this group. So you said that's in November?
Yep, November.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, John, for putting Thornton's update in the chat. If you wanted to add anything, feel free to come off mute. Anybody from the West Slope? I want to hear about kind of the strong monsoons that we saw here in late summer. So it'd be great to hear from someone on the West Slope. All right, well, if there's no takers today, I guess we can conclude several minutes early. Thank you, Shell, for dropping the information in the chat. Thanks again to Peter and Nagam for their presentations today. Our next Water Conditions Monitoring Committee meeting will be in November. So we're skipping October, and our next meeting will be on November 19th. So I will see you all then. Thank you so much for joining.